So, is there a recession coming or not? Mark Twain once said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme." So let's take a little walk down memory lane and see if there's some lessons we can learn. Okay, welcome back. And since 2011, inflation has taken off around the world, and central bankers seem pretty aggressive on how they want to fight it, and interest rates have been surging. And that's triggered most people to wonder, and the press to really kind of frame things, and I feel as a binary way of, will there or won't there be a recession? Now, in the short to intermediate term, they also believe that markets are going to be driven by what is the answer to that question. Now, I think that's actually a bit ridiculous. And as you know, I think most financial journalism is a bit ridiculous. So to me, it isn't a question of will there or won't be a recession. No one's repealed the business cycle. So of course there will be one. I think the issues are more in the intermediate term anyway, far more important, which is when one comes, how deep will it be? How long might it last? And what will the impact be on the earnings of the greatest businesses that we own? And again, none of these things, just so you know, is it all predictable. And the way those things interact is also wildly unpredictable. But it doesn't stop the talking heads from trying. So let me see if I can add a little bit to this too. So to prove my point that this is unpredictable, I want to look at just the last 3 recessions that we've had in the millennium. And I think it's an interesting sample size because if we look at the biggest stock market declines in history, 3 of the biggest 5 have happened in that time frame. So I think it's a pretty good sample size. So why don't we start with the first one since the 2000s, which was the dot-com bubble bursting. And that would be from March 2001 to November 2001. It lasted 8 months, and peak unemployment hit 6.3% in June of 2002. The GDP declined by 0.3% over that period. And the bursting of the dot-com bubble, and remember, this was one of the biggest stock manias we've ever seen, like cannabis, AI, Bitcoin. These things are pikers in comparison. And then you combine the bursting of the dot-com bubble with the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and amazingly, the U.S. economy was only down for about 8 months, and the U.S. GDP declined by a fraction of 1%. So incredible resilience. Now, the market kept going down for a year after the economy bottomed. It went down by 49%, and that's the broad market. If we look at the NASDAQ, which had all the technology stocks, it was down dramatically more, as some of you remember. And unemployment didn't peak for another 2 years until June of 2003. So this really was randomness. Like there is no pattern to be learned from all those intersection of events. Well, maybe the financial crisis can tell us a bit more, which went from December of 2007 to June of 2009. And that lasted 18 months, and peak unemployment hit 10% in October of 2009. GDP in the United States declined by 5.1%. And I think most of us would agree that the global financial crisis was really the most complete meltdown of the world's financial system that we've seen since the 1930s. And it created the longest and deepest recession of the post-war period. And interestingly, the worst it could do was take U.S. GDP down by less than 5%. The stock market, obviously, which always overreacts in either direction, it was down by 57% at its worst. And when it bottomed, it came roaring back, it was just 4 months before the official end of the recession, which is also an interesting thing to remember. We don't actually know there's a recession until it's over because it's confirmed later. So by the time they tell us we have one, it might be done. So the equity market, again, bottomed by 57%. And if all you did was hang on, you got most of your money back really quickly, actually. And so the key thing there was don't sell and don't panic. Okay, that's a helpful lesson to learn. Now let's look at what COVID taught us. Now, this was the most recent one, and I bet some of you still have a mask in your glove box or in your briefcase or your purse or in your kitchen somewhere. So it may not be done with us, actually. We don't really know. But the COVID crash lasted from February 2020 to April 2020, when they just shut the world down and told all of us to stay home. So it only lasted 2 months, but the effect on unemployment was dramatic. U.S. unemployment hit 14.7% in April of 2020, and GDP in the U.S. declined by 19.2%. So this was an outlier in every way. We haven't seen anything like this since the Spanish flu of over 100 years before. Unemployment soared, GDP cratered, and pretty much instantaneously, and it looked from all the data that we were headed into 1930s territory. Now, obviously, central bankers and governments around the world see the same numbers and have the same perspective of history, or at least they should know anyway. So they decided to take what really was an unprecedented response in terms of how much money they printed and gave out around the world. So the fiscal response and the monetary response was unlike anything we've ever seen. And just to give you an image of it, I'm going to show you what U.S. money supply did. And this chart goes back to 1960. And every time I show this to people, it surprises them. Like, look what they did. And if I got the same data from, Germany, France, Canada, everybody did effectively the same thing, which is why we find ourselves where we are today. They just printed so much money. It should not really be a surprise to anybody that we have inflation. I talked about this a while ago in one of my Walking with Charlies, and I'll put a link up here for you to go and revisit that. So markets obviously recovered really quickly as a result of that in 2021. So again, if you didn't panic, things were okay. But we've actually been kind of struggling a little bit ever since then because of how much money was printed and what all the impacts and outcomes are from doing that. So we obviously haven't mentioned any other events that have also shocked markets and shocked investors. Things like the war in Ukraine, the terrorist attacks in Israel recently, our economic and political struggles with China and now with Canada and India. So there's lots of things in the press that would cause investors to be really concerned about what's happening and worry about, is there or isn't there a recession? But my point in sharing these examples with you and these data points is that all of this is unpredictable, and there's no way possibly to forecast how these things are going to play out. We only really get to do that in hindsight and play Monday morning quarterback. But what we do know is that a recession will come, it will end, and it will be temporary. And what it should not do is force us to stop enjoying the long-term compounding growth of owning the best companies in Canada, the United States, and around the world. Let those really smart people that are very competitive in their individual management teams figure out what they're going to do about this in their businesses. Because if you look at the long-term chart, it's not a smooth line. It has bumps in it, but the direction's pretty clear. And I want you to keep in mind this old Wall Street saying, which is, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. And I think it's because people forget that we also get headlines like this. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to do nothing. So with that, I want to wish, I hope that you and your family and your loved ones are safe. The world seems to be a bit of a scary place, so hug the people you care about. If you need anything from us, from me or my team, please reach out to us directly. And with that, I wish you well. We'll talk soon.